Spotlight now, we focus in on affordable housing here in the state of Hawaii.
We have policy experts and experts in banking. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Thanks for tuning in here on this Tuesday. We are going to be focusing in on housing, as we mentioned, but we always want to encourage those of you who are watching both on air and online to participate in our conversation with our guests. You can enter your questions and comments for our guests in the comment section of our Facebook page at Hawaii News Now, or by scanning this QR code that you see here at the bottom of your screen.
We're so happy to see you. Thanks for being here today. And we want to welcome in Sterling Higa, who is the Executive Director of Housing Hawaii's Future. Sterling, we always love having you on. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, we sort of have talked to you specifically on Maui in the past, but today's discussion, we really want to focus on the state as a whole. We can get to county by county later, but let's just lay the groundwork for where we are right now. We hear about affordable housing. We just went through an election. It's always the buzzwords. Where are we when it comes to this crisis?
In the last few years, housing costs have skyrocketed, and this is part of larger cost of living increases, inflation. It's happening at the gas pump, it's happening when you're buying groceries, it's happening when you pay for electricity, and housing is no exception. So rents and for sale prices have gone up across our state, and that's really squeezing a lot of local families.
When looking at the progress, or if we have made progress in the last few years, what do you think have been some of the successes of what we've been able to do, be it policy-wise or just be it in the way in which we are viewing now this affordable housing crisis?
This last legislative session, 2 bills passed at the state level that represent the most significant statewide zoning reforms since 1981. One bill, SB 3202, will allow for 2 accessory dwelling units on most residentially zoned lots. That's the most significant bill since the Ohana dwelling unit bill was passed back in 1981, which allowed for 1 accessory dwelling unit. The other bill, HB 2090, will allow for multifamily residential construction on commercially zoned property, but will also allow for adaptive reuse. So right now we have a lot of commercially zoned property, old office buildings that could potentially be repurposed into housing, and making that easier for builders is going to allow us to have more housing.
When you've been on in the past, we've talked a lot about zoning regulations and different obstacles that are in the way. When you look at this landscape, what do you see as the biggest hurdle that we need to pass?
The first thing is addressing our restrictive zoning. So in a lot of areas, we limit what can be built, and we don't allow for height and density that makes housing affordable. But beyond that, we really need to speed up our permitting. All 4 of our counties are among the slowest in the country at permitting new housing. In the 60s and 70s, when we were building a lot of housing, we were permitting a lot of housing. Unsurprisingly, we're not permitting a lot of housing today, and we're not building enough housing.
And why is that? We've heard, of course, the city and county of Honolulu has had some very serious issues with DPP. The mayor has, said that is a priority to clean that up, put in a new director, a lot of changes made there. But, if you're saying it's in all the counties, certainly all the counties, do they share something in common? What is the holdup there?
If we're relying on a human being to review a permit, and it's a government employee, entry-level permit reviewers in the counties make slightly more than a Starbucks employee does. So it's really hard to recruit for these positions. As long as we're relying on these poorly paid civil service positions to review permits, we're going to have permit backlogs.
When we're looking at specific things that are happening in counties, the last time you were on, you talked about some of the challenges that exist in Maui County, especially with what's happened in Lahaina and the urgent need for housing and development to happen a lot quicker. I'm wondering if you can update us on some of the things that you proposed in front of the City Council on Maui, any conversations that you've had thus far about helping to not only expedite that process, but to really just help the inventory overall.
Maui County has made some moves to start permitting things faster, especially in the rebuild zone in Lahaina. In the long term, what Maui has to do is to update Title 19, which is their zoning code. Maui has the most restrictive zoning code of all 4 of the counties, and unsurprisingly, it's been really difficult to build affordable housing there. There is progress being made. Maui has done a missing middle housing study, where they've looked at opportunities where they can build this medium density housing that's not skyscrapers, but is appropriate for neighbor islands and will add housing supply. So they're making progress. I think for families on Maui, many of whom have left, the progress doesn't come fast enough, right? You need a house today. You don't need a house 2 or 3 years from now.
I want to go back to what you were saying about the permitting and relying on these folks who are entry level and need some expertise to approve those permits. The mayor had said, Mayor Blangiardi had said that he was trying to employ more technology. Certainly, we can't be the only municipality that's dealing with this. There must be folks on the continent who are facing the same issue. Are there other communities who have perhaps used artificial intelligence or, better software to try to dig through this?
Other communities use AI review to help with permitting reviews, and Honolulu County is moving in that direction. The other thing that's commonly employed is self-certification. So if professional architects and engineers stamp off on your plans, they're essentially putting their reputation on the line. And so many localities will accept that in lieu of having government employees permit things, as long as professionals certify those projects.
And when you're looking ahead towards this next legislative session, what are some of the things that you're hoping to come about, be it through legislation or more conversations that are coming forward, that you think will help move the needle in this coming legislative session?
This legislative session, I'm hearing from legislators that they want to get serious about transit-oriented development. And that involves two things. So in Honolulu, along the rail line and the neighbor islands and our town cores, we need to move towards multimodal, dense communities where people don't need to rely on a car to get around. That means first investing in infrastructure so we have sufficient water, wastewater, drainage capacity to make these areas work. But it also means we have to upzone these areas. So for instance, in Honolulu along the rail line, if we're going to move toward a world where everybody is relying on the rail to get to and from work, you have to have enough density around the stations to support commercial uses, lots of residents, and make it vibrant. That the kind of communities that you see in countries like Japan or in Southeast Asia or in Europe are enabled by that density in your transit corridors.
So that's changing the policy to allow for more density, essentially.
Yes, right now the state invests money in the counties to help them with the planning for these transit-oriented development districts, but the counties don't always change their zoning to allow for the density that will allow for transit-oriented development. So a very simple shift at the state level would be requiring that the counties actually, if they put an area on a map as a TOD zone, zone it as if it were a TOD zone.
Do you think that there is synergy between the state and the city, the various counties? Because as you talk about this is something that would have to pass on the legislative level, but ultimately at some points have to be implemented by counties. And often we've seen in the past that there are disagreements between the two entities, especially over land ownership, different visions of what should happen. In what conversations that you've heard and been a part of, do you think that there is a little bit more of a cohesiveness in the overall messaging on this?
For me, it's always the narcissism of small differences. If you ask state or county level politicians, they all want the same thing. They campaign on the same thing. What they disagree about oftentimes is who makes the decision and who pays. And obviously, you would prefer that you make the decision and other people pay. So aligning those two things, if you want to make the decisions, you should be the one that pays. So for example, if the counties want to make the decision about zoning in the TOD zones, they need to stop taking money from the state. If the state's going to pony up money for infrastructure or for infrastructure planning, then the state in return should make sure that those TOD zones are going to provide a return on their investment. So those two things, who makes the decision, who pays, are the continual disagreement. But in general, I've seen a movement toward county and state working well together.
One of the challenges that we face here in Hawaii, and Peter Savio has talked about this, is that we're really a global market, right? That we have interested parties from all over the world who would love to move here. And if we make housing too affordable, that they will then come out, outside investors will come in, scoop it up, and we defeat the purpose. Senator Awa last session had introduced some measures to try to restrict this. The Attorney General says that's not legal, so we can't do it. How do we make sure that the housing that we are creating that is indeed affordable is actually for local folks?
Peter Savio is right that we need a locals-only housing market that's insulated from these international market pressures. One of the ways we can get there is through a voluntary deed restriction program. So on Maui County after the fire, the county gave $100,000 grants to families if they would build accessory dwelling units, so long as they agreed to keep those accessory dwelling units affordable for a period of time. On Maui, it was 10 years. I think this program was oversubscribed on Maui, and it's an example that could be replicated across the state. Either the state or the county government, or both together, pay homeowners to build accessory dwelling units on the condition that they keep those units affordable, but also maybe make sure that if they're renting out or selling their primary residence, that they keep that affordable as well. It's a simple way that the county and state can put money into increasing the supply of housing, but making sure that we're setting aside that housing so that it's for local working families.
Can you walk us through what that would look like? Let's say I'm a homeowner, I have some capital, or I have some land, maybe not the 100,000. What happens?
Yeah, so building costs are a huge barrier for a lot of families. They have the land, but to get $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 to build an ADU, most families may not be able to access that capital. If the government goes in for $100,000, it's much easier to sort of float that difference for a family. Then the condition is for that accessory dwelling unit for a period of time, it could be 10 years, it could be 30 years, you're going to rent that at a price that's affordable to, the average working family in your community. So we create a new dwelling unit, and that dwelling unit is going to be affordable for a period of time. These ADU assistance grants are one of the most affordable ways that we can add to our housing supply and keep it affordable.
One of the things that we are hearing from some of the residents on Maui is that they've received this federal funding through grants. They've received support through other nonprofits and local organizations that are helping them in this rebuilding process. But again, we get back to this, not only permitting, but the availability of just the labor force to be able to help them build these homes. Some of them having now saying that it could potentially take 5 to 6 years before they're even allowed to even begin building. But the price at that point is going to be much different than it is right now. And they're worried about that shortfall between what they're allocated now and what they'll eventually end up paying once everything's approved and once they're able to get things moving. In those types of scenarios, especially on the island of Maui, how do you think we solve this with just this overall demand for workforce in this construction area?
On Maui, it's going to be tough because you have a cycle where the very workers you need to rebuild housing need housing themselves. And Maui's workforce is essentially tapped out and obligated with all of the jobs that they have. You have to be building more workforce housing for workers on Maui that's affordable for those workers. But statewide, we're going to be having construction labor shortages in the next few years. We're already at a peak for construction employment. And with large contracts looming at, say, Pearl Harbor, there's going to be a ton of construction activity that pulls people away from residential construction. So it's going to be a crunched labor market. We just have to make the best of it.
That doesn't sound very encouraging. And for that very reason, we want to give the workers themselves a place to live. I mean, you hear about that as well, that the very people who need to be there, who are working, cannot afford it. Going back to that original question in terms of laying out the landscape for folks here in Hawaii, are things getting better? Are they getting worse? Where do you feel that the average person is right now in this? We've had 8 years of out-migration now. How are we doing?
I'm cautiously optimistic that things can get better. The trend says otherwise. So to your point, 8 consecutive years of population decline, each year declining about 1%. One of the things that you have in Hawaii is a total fertility ratio that's below replacement. So essentially, we have more deaths than births every year. That ratio has been trending in the wrong direction for decades. So we are no longer having children. The problem is when a society starts to decline and shrink, it becomes less attractive for young people. Young people, when they're deciding where do I want to start my career, want to go to a community that's growing, that's vibrant. That's why they're moving to places like Austin or Miami or Atlanta. It becomes less and less attractive as a place shrinks. And so there is a worry that if we don't get a handle on our shrinking population, that if we don't think about economic growth, we'll make a Hawaii that's less and less attractive for our children every year.
And what other concerns do you have about what happens to Hawaii if this continues in this direction? I mean, when we talk about not only being able to afford homes and people running into this issue of, living in and working here in Hawaii, but the workforce also is going to take a significant hit. Not enough workers. I mean, just kind of paint that picture of what some of the, other negative impacts could be because of this.
We live on Oahu. If you go to neighbor islands like Maui, they resemble retirement communities. Essentially, there are lots of very wealthy people who have finished their careers, are no longer working. They live comfortably, while the few people that are working are really struggling paycheck to paycheck, struggling to afford housing, and increasingly leaving. My concern for the whole state is we could move in that direction, where we become a place where Very wealthy retirees from the mainland come here. They have a wonderful time. The average local family that has children or grandchildren that they want to survive here has an increasingly tough time struggling with the difference between their wages and the cost of living.
Yeah, and we're so focused on the affordability piece, but there's also the culture piece, right? We live in Hawaii because we love our community, we love the people, we love our neighbors, and we want our children to have that same experience. Talk about what's lost in that regard.
Well, my family is fifth generation local Japanese, so this place, Hawaii, is all that I've ever known, all that my mom ever knew, all that my grandmother ever knew. If you think about families that go back generations, especially our native Hawaiian families, they have a connection to place, a connection to history that a recent arrival just simply doesn't have. Major concern is if somebody moves here, they're retired, they have no connection to this place, but they also have no children or grandchildren here. They're not thinking 2 or 3 generations into the future or 2 or 3 generations into the past. They only care about what's good for them right now. And if you have a majority of people who fit that description, your political decision making starts to reflect a very short-term, immediate gratification approach to politics. And I think longtime local families understand that you can't just gratify your needs immediately, but you have to think about what will be good for our children, what will be good for our grandchildren.
This issue of affordable housing is not something that's confined here to Hawaii. We've heard it a lot during the presidential campaign and just nationwide politics with a lot of lawmakers and policymakers who were bringing up this issue of affordable housing. In doing your research as someone who is in this field, is there any other city or any other model that you would like to see implemented in Hawaii or parts of something that might work here?
Across the Western United States, there are states that are similar to us: California, Washington, Oregon. These are cities and states that have very restrictive laws around housing, and in the last few years have had a yes in my backyard or YIMBY movement that tries to change some of the regulation around zoning to make it easier to build housing. In Hawaii, we would do well to take a page out of these states' playbook because they're facing very similar demographic challenges, very similar housing regulatory challenges, and they've made considerable progress over the last few years that we can imitate and replicate.
And beyond, we're talking so much about policy and government, but let's talk a little bit about the private sector. We do, after the break, have some folks from American Savings Bank joining us to talk about some specific policies and programs that they put into place that they say can help local folks stay here and is also simultaneously good business. So this is possible. What do you think the private sector's role is in all of this?
A huge part is education. So private sector employers can educate their workforce, provide them with education on home ownership programs, education on financial literacy and loans to prepare their own workers for home ownership. And of course, if you're in the position like American Savings Bank or the other banks to provide lending for families, the more financial service products there are for people who are trying to get into home ownership, the better. A lot of families just are missing a little bit, and if there are assistance programs that can get them over that hump into home ownership, they can really alter the course of their whole family generationally.
We've seen a lot of different types of legislation that has been proposed, some passing on the county level, others on the statewide level. When it comes to short-term vacation rentals and long-term vacation rentals, how significant of a role do changes in these types of Airbnbs or VRBOs and the structure and the limitations that are being placed county by county, how much of an impact do you think that's realistically going to make on just the overall availability of homes?
It's huge for counties like Maui. In counties like Honolulu, even if you crack down on short-term rentals, I don't think it moves the needle all that much, and the same is true for Kauai. In Maui in particular, a huge portion of the available housing inventory has been essentially used for the purpose of short-term rentals. I don't know exactly what the solution is. I'm not convinced that if you ban all short-term rentals, magically all of those units become long-term rentals. But anything you can do to move some of those units to long-term rentals, at the very least, think about it this way. If you create a housing unit for one family, that family's going to be pretty grateful. If you do that for 100 families, that's 100 families that are pretty grateful. Anything we can do to move the needle for families on Maui in the next few years is important because otherwise they leave.
We know that the audience that watches this program is very politically minded, very engaged. We appreciate all of you. And so for folks who are gearing up for the legislative session, who might not be lawmakers themselves, what should they be watching for? I know you said TOD and also this idea of creating this incentive to build on property with this $100,000. I mean, do you think that something like that will actually come to bear?
Yes, I've seen some proposals related to TOD, some proposals related to these voluntary deed restrictions. Those are two policies that I think are really exciting, and it would be helpful at the legislature to have everyone chiming in and giving their opinions on these proposals, because if it's only the same people that show up to testify, lawmakers get bored. But when they see that there are passionate people leaning into the housing discussion, then they realize that these are things they can afford to be bold on. Politicians in general are risk averse. They don't want to stick their neck out. But when they see the community calling for something, all of a sudden they want to lead that charge.
And what about the workforce housing that we've heard proposed, say for teachers and having homes built on school grounds, on state property? Do you think that is realistic? And have you had conversations with those involved in that proposal as well?
Yes, and we should do more of it. Teacher housing is the lowest hanging fruit. A lot of our schools are underutilized. There's tons of land that could easily be used for teacher housing. But it's not just our school sites. We have a lot of state and county-owned land along the rail line in Honolulu, for example, that could be used for workforce housing. And it's workforce not just for educators, but for civil service, for healthcare, for hospitality, for the skilled trades, even small business owners. I think we should move toward making housing available for people that work within a given area. So if you work within 20 miles of this site, you're eligible for the housing there. Throw out income, right? If you're a nurse and you make $130,000 a year, great. You should be able to live near your hospital. It means you don't need to drive. It means you have more time to spend with your family or get involved in the community. And so we should be thinking about making sure there's housing where the jobs are.
I want to bring in a viewer question before we let you go. Lori Ignacio is saying it's not only the price, it's the interest rates that kill it for locals to afford. We know that we're going to have some banking folks on, so we'll ask them this as well. But given the high cost of lending right now, or of borrowing rather, what can we? There's very little we can do about that.
I think about a metaphor of a garden, right? Which is nothing will grow if your soil is bad. We're in a situation where we need to get the soil right so that as interest rates come down, both for home buyers, but also for commercial developers that are building these towers, that are building these projects, they will have fertile conditions in which to actually grow and build things. So we can tend our garden. We can reform zoning. We can reform the building code. We can make adaptive reuse easier. It will take interest rates coming down to generate significant construction activity and to make more homes available.
Tending the garden. I think that's what you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sterling Higa here with Housing Hawaii's Future. We'll be right back after this.
What is Hawaii's soul?
It's the way we exist with all living things. The aina, the ocean, the sky, the kanaka, who originated from the islands.
And everyone who calls Hawaii home.
It's all of us living with island consciousness.
It's understanding that the past is in front of us so that everyone can follow the kupuna
that came before us.
It's our shared kuleana to take care of these islands.
And each other, because we belong to Hawaii.
We are Go Hawaii.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And welcome back. We're continuing on in our conversation about affordable housing. But again, we want to remind those of you who are watching that want to get involved in the conversation. You can scan this QR code or enter your comments into the Facebook section of our Hawaii News Now Facebook page.
Yeah, thank you so much for those of you who are writing in. We want to welcome in now Billy Piper, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships over at American Savings Bank. Billy, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, I love, I've heard you speak on this before, so I'd love for you to lay out for our audience the way you see this challenge. We heard a lot on the policy side from Sterling. When you look at the affordable housing landscape, what strikes you?
Local people are leaving. So as the data shows, Sterling touched on it a little bit. We've experienced, and this is the first time in our history, by the way, so we haven't seen this type of stuff happen before. First time ever, 8 consecutive years of net out-migration. Last year, for instance, 60,000 people left, 45,000 people or so came in, right? you add to that the concept that when you look forward, Hero is predicting for the next 5 years, there will be more deaths than births. Our population will be shrinking. Tax base, as a result, will be shrinking. We are in a crisis. Not only are we losing the keepers of our culture, right, and the people who make Hawaii so special, but we're losing our workforce. And that, to me, is a cause of concern. Housing is not the only thing, but it's a major cause for a lot of these folks leaving.
And talk a little bit about what specifically American Savings Bank has decided to do in order to make this a priority, and the ways and the mechanisms that the bank has chosen to get involved in this crisis.
Well, several things. I'd say the first thing is we said we need to do something. We need to focus on this. We always have been very philanthropic in terms of our community service, our dollars that we give. But we said 2 years ago, we need to make a conscious effort to really go deep and focus on housing. So one of the things we did is we looked at the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. They were getting some resources. We knew supply was going to be added to the Hawaiian Homeland inventory. We wanted to make sure that borrowers were ready to purchase these homes. So we made a conscious decision to get HUD certified to offer leasehold financing for these beneficiaries. That was our entry into this about 2 years ago. And then most recently, we looked at what are the two biggest barriers to home ownership when it comes to the access side, when it comes to folks purchasing homes. And really what we found, it was down payment, these huge down payments required, right? Coupled with the monthly payment. If residents could afford the monthly, they could afford the house. And so what we did was we looked at our lending landscape, right? We saw that VA loans in particular were great vehicles to buy homes. Low down payment, not a lot of added fees to it, so the monthly was kept in check. We said, how do we replicate the VA type loan for local residents? And so we created a product called This Is Home. Again, it features a low down payment, below market interest rate, low fees, and it was our attempt to reduce the cost of financing, get more folks in homeownership positions.
Given that you're charging less, is this still good business?
Yeah, we're a bank. We're regulated. We have shareholders. We needed to cross that hurdle first. And what we're finding, so first, yes, we had to make sure it was sustainable. But second is what we're finding after a year of this program in effect, we are pleased by the results. What we've maybe are investing in the community as far as lack of profit or a reduced profit, we're making up in volume. And so it's proving to be, noteworthy. I joke internally at the bank, as a team of us, we're parading these ideas through. One principle I just reminded everybody about was this concept that you cannot, this principle on earth, right, is you cannot refresh others without you yourself being refreshed. And that's what we're finding with this program.
We heard from Sterling saying, you almost have to prep the soil and get it ready. And in a lot of ways, that is what you're doing with some of those who may not have the means right now, but just getting ready for that process. What are some of the success stories and some of the things that you've heard about this process of approaching home ownership in this way, and how it was able to help expedite this whole process as a whole?
We're helping first-time home buyers. We're helping folks who went away to college on the continent. And now we're providing opportunities for these folks to actually buy a home here. They're making good money, right? And because of these programs that we're creating for this I think Sterling mentioned this missing middle. There's a lot of programs for folks in the what we call 80% AMI and below, or folks not making a lot of money. The low income population, a lot of federal programs, a lot of state programs, even city programs. There are not a lot of programs for folks making good money, the firefighter and the nurse, the teacher and the policeman. Those households, there are no federal programs to really help them. So that's what this program is doing. And to get back to, what we're seeing is we're seeing, I can say it, 1 out of every 4 loans we've closed in the mortgage space this year have been for first-time homebuyers. So we're seeing people actually notice what we're doing and say, can we apply? And they're applying, and we're seeing these dreams come true.
Your role at the bank is really unique, and I'm interested into why this is personal for you.
Yeah, I'm native Hawaiian. I love this place. And ASB has been remarkable in providing me, and we have a housing hui of folks cross-departmental in the bank that have been focused on this issue for the last 2+ years. And so ASB's really stepped up. They provided the leadership, the resources to help us stand this thing up. And I think it's partly because, as I was thinking about this program, not only are we losing the keepers of of our culture, like I mentioned, not only are we losing our people, but I have a 21-year-old son and 2 more coming up through Iolani, and there is not a assumed hope that my kids are going to be able to live here, and that cannot happen on our watch. We need to do something about it. And I'm not saying, American Savings, like I said, grateful that we're doing a ton of work in this space. We're not the only one. We're one of many, and we're happy to be a part of it.
In looking at just the success that you've had, and I know you mentioned some of these other things, what has been the biggest surprise to you through this process of launching this? Maybe it's something that the misconception that many of these first-time home buyers have, or something that you would think would come to as common knowledge for some, but maybe not. What are some of those surprises that have stood out to you during this process of trying to help first-time home buyers?
The first surprise has been the success of the program. I didn't realize that we're going to help this many people. So that was the first. But the second is that we didn't really do much. We got creative. We said, hey, how can, right? I mean, this exists already for the military. How do we create something similar for local people? And so we got, smart people together. We had a lot of conversations across the housing ecosystem, and we landed on This Is Home, right, as an example. And so what was so surprising is that it just took us trying. To me, if something's this important, we cannot not try. Even if the probable outcome, I think Elon Musk talks about, even if the probable outcome is failure, we still need to try. I use this all the time, but you can't learn how to drive in a parked car. We have to get something going. And what we're seeing is, over the last year or so of this program, positive results. So I'd say I'm surprised with that, but I'm also surprised in the fact that how open people like Sterling, Governor, we're talking government, nonprofit, developers, private. The housing ecosystem, actually, it's interesting. They all have their hand in the huddle, and we're trying to solve this together. It's not one person or one group, one organization doing it. We need more, definitely, but that's Hawaii for you, and that's something that I shouldn't have been surprised about, but one of the other things that surprised me.
And when someone is a first-time home buyer and then they do enter home ownership, we know that you change the trajectory of their financial future, not just for them, but if there are, their children behind them. But talk about the difference that can make, and also rooting them then to stay in Hawaii.
Oh, yeah. Fee simple housing or fee simple ownership is a generational wealth creator, right? You have this opportunity to have your home appreciate. You can borrow from the equity in the home. I mean, yeah, it definitely sets a different trajectory for these homeowners. But the piece about owning a place of Aina, I feel like that's something that's overlooked too. This connection to place, I think it's very important and something that, quite frankly, I haven't been talking a lot about.
One of the concerns that we had mentioned with Sterling that we also see is just where things are with interest rates and just the cost of borrowing. Through this process, I mean, what is the message that you tell those who are entering this field, knowing that we could continue to see these fluctuations in interest rates overall, but those who maybe want to wait a little bit longer, when is a good time, I guess, to enter this?
There really is no perfect time. We don't foresee rates dramatically falling, right? And that's why we're creating products that feature below market interest rates, right? To kind of get people off the bench, off the fence, so to speak, so that they enter into the market and not wait. The thing is, we're short on inventory, right? We have a lack of supply. As supply is added to our overall housing inventory, it's going to get competitive. People are going to, more buyers are going to be in the market for a home. And so, again, I'm not going to give advice, but I'd say If you're in position to, it makes sense from affordability perspective. You found the place you want. I wouldn't wait because, like I said, we don't foresee rates dramatically falling, and the sooner you can lock in, the better. Because, like I said, as inventory is added, it's going to get competitive.
I want to ask you a little bit about rediscovering Hawaii Soul. We have had a number of folks from Hawaii Executive Collaborative join us on this program, talk about rediscovering Hawaii Soul and the work that those folks are doing. How does what you're doing tie into that work? It's
Directly related, right? It's what can we do? What can we do to restore Hawaii's soul, right? This concept of Hawaii losing its soul in the first place is evident, right? We're seeing the roads a little bit more mean, right? Where people are a little less friendly. More parties are happening in the backyards than the front yards. So I feel like there's a lot of that happening. The thing is, when you talk about Hawaii's soul, yes, heavily related to the Native Hawaiian culture, but really it's about reciprocity. It's about no need goes unmet. A community, we go take care of each other. We're sort of losing that. And now as corporations looking at this crisis, as organizations who love this place, what are we bringing to the so-called potluck to help make the situation better? What are we bringing to the table to restore Hawaii's soul, to reintroduce this concept of no need goes unmet? We will take care of you guys, especially the historically overlooked. And so it's directly tied to rediscovering Hawaii's soul and this concept that we're all in this together. I think Colbert Matsumoto said this, because I said, what's different, right? What's different? It feels like we've been having these conversations the last 50 years, right? The last 100 years probably, right? What Colbert said that's different this year than, let's say, 50 years ago was that now more than ever, we are so interdependent. There are not large concentrations of power in Hawaii anymore. Like back in the day, maybe the Big Five or the unions or the whole. Now, a lot of it is offshore ownership or it's shareholder ownership. And we still have local leadership in many cases. So we need to leverage that, bring everybody together to really come up with solutions that are going to help solve not only the workforce and this housing issue, but around restoring this concept of community, reciprocity, no needs go unmet.
Before we are going to be bringing in a colleague of yours from American State Bank to expand a little bit more about what's happening with the bank, but just for you, as we wrap up our time specifically with you, what is one thing that concerns you the most about this? I mean, I know you kind of elaborated in a sense of things about your future for your family and such, but what is one of the more major concerns that you have about this issue?
Lack of action. I feel like the example I use it in some cases is, you think about it's football season. Imagine us watching a football game. Quarterback calls the offense to the middle of the field, calls a play, says ready, break, and then the offense runs to the sideline. We're watching in the stands saying, what are we watching here? He comes back out, calls a play, ready, break, they do it again. That would be the most boring game to ever watch. But I feel like Hawaii, in many cases, in many places, we love to huddle. We love to meet and talk about stuff. But when we call the play, we say ready, break, and then we run to the sideline. That cannot happen anymore, and I don't think it is. And I think this is ASB is providing an example. Again, like many others, we do not own the monopoly on good ideas, but we are trying to run plays. And I think that's what concerns me most, but also gives me some hope as we look forward.
Yeah, and what happens if we don't run those plays? What are you worried about for Hawaii in the future?
Hawaii will be unrecognizable, period. The Hawaii that we grew up loving, and quite frankly, everybody has a little different definition, but there's one thing unique, and it's this concept of, we use the term aloha, but it's this concept of reciprocity, community, taking care of one another, and that is going to be lost because we're exporting local, hardworking people for older, richer people not from here without the same foundation and grounding. And so as Sterling mentioned, it's going to look like a resort area, right? And again, no disrespect to anybody, but I'm saying that's not what we want here, and that's not what we remember, and that's not why people love this place so much. And so we got to run plays.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Michelle Bartel is going to be joining us. She does some community work for the bank. She's got a lot to expand on. Billy's sticking with us. We hope you will too. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello and welcome back to Spotlight Now as we continue on in our conversation about a crisis here in Hawaii, and that is affordable housing. We've been speaking to experts who have been sharing their knowledge about this, and we are once again encouraging all of you to engage in the conversation by scanning the QR code and entering your comments and your own observations about this housing crisis in Hawaii.
Yeah, thanks to those of you who are sharing online right now. We want to welcome in Michelle Bartel, who is Director of Community Advancement at American Savings Bank. And thanks, Billy, for sticking around. We appreciate you as well. You know, Michelle, I want to build on one thing that really struck me about what Billy was sharing was that 1 out of 4 of the new loans being for new homeowners and the impact that that has. Can you tell us a little bit about what the bank is doing beyond the program that he spoke about?
Sure. Well, you know, we're obviously so excited that This Is Home has really taken off, and it just proves the need in the community. We recognize that, you know, in addition to being able to provide these products that would address that need for having a big down payment, we also need to make sure that we have consumer readiness, right? And so we've been working with nonprofit partners who are out there doing housing counseling and really making sure that consumers are ready for the product that's now there for them. So a great example of this is we've worked with Hawaii Community Assets as well as Hawaiian Community Lending. And you know, they're really working very closely with first-time home buyers, because it's a process. It really takes a while for somebody to be ready. We want them to be ready, right? We want them to be in the pipeline so that, we have the combination of a consumer who has a budget, who has some down payment saved, who has a good credit score, so that we can then offer the product and know that they'll be successful as homeowners. So that's been a really important part of our strategy, is making sure that we have that piece in place so that homeowners really are ready to take advantage of the product.
Yeah, and Billy, if you can expand upon that, especially with regards to just the various partnerships, because we know that there are other people, and some of the ones are the ones that organizations that Michelle has mentioned. But how key are some of these nonprofits and these other organizations that you're working with? How important are they to the overall success of what you guys are trying to do?
Super important. One example, Michelle mentioned Hawaii Community Lending. They are what we call a CDFI, a Community Developed Financial Institution. Basically, in English, that means that they provide financing to people that traditional banks don't typically finance. And so this meets a very important need. For instance, construction lending. When we talk about Hawaiian homelands and beneficiaries who receive a vacant lot, very few banks, if any, will lend or provide a loan for them to build a home on that vacant lot. Hawaii Community Lending will. So we entered into a partnership, Michelle mentioned, where we actually provide them capital to then deploy to these organizations or to these individuals who have a lease to Hawaiian homelands and then can construct their home. And then once the home is built, then we, like I mentioned earlier, we're HUD certified to offer permanent loans to these folks, and so we'll come in, provide the takeout financing for those individuals, recapitalize Hawaii Community Lending so then they can do it over again, and it's a rinse and repeat model.
One of the things that Sterling had mentioned and that we know generally is the case is that we just don't have enough workers. We don't have enough construction hands to build all the housing stock that we need. So tell us a little bit about this Hui Kapili Business Accelerator Program and how it ties into that. Billy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, IO approached us a little under a year ago with this idea of providing or creating a builder's accelerator for the construction trade. Because of our involvement in housing, it was a no-brainer. And so we got involved. We're coming upon the graduation, and it flew by. But we provided basically a 10-week accelerator program to surround these companies with the tools they need to succeed as a business. Many of them great with the hammer, great with the drywall, great with the trade, not so good at marketing, HR, managing finances. So we wanted to equip these folks not only so that they can survive. Small businesses, it's tough in Hawaii. So we don't want them only to survive. We want them to flourish, because not only do we need inventory, right? We need builders to build these homes, renovate homes, but we also need jobs. And the construction trade is one of those places or one of those careers where you actually can make a good living.
Yeah, Michelle, tell us a little bit what excites you about that program. I mean, it sounds like a great idea. We've heard of business accelerator programs where you help small businesses make it, but a building accelerator is pretty unique.
Yeah, it really is. And, I think when you get that cohort coming together, that's really where some of the magic happens, right? And so you have that cross-sector collaboration going on, and we've heard just such great things about, the interaction between the companies that are there, and they really feel like the whole community is behind them because, I feel like to a certain extent, we're all a reflection of the people around us that support us and kind of lift us up. And so that's one of the things that I think is so great about Hui Kapili, and it's really different. It's not a space where you would normally think of a bank participating, so.
I want to ask a little bit about specifically what's happened on Maui. Obviously, one of the communities that is grappling with just the housing crisis and what they're doing to rebuild. Michelle, maybe if you can tell us about how the bank has maybe helped specifically those individuals who are dealing with all this loss and trying to find housing, and any initiatives being a part of the community activation part of the bank, how American Savings Bank is helping to provide that support.
Sure. Well, like a lot of other organizations here, I think everybody really tried to wrap their arms around folks on Maui recognizing that, their recovery is going to be a long process. And so some of the things that we did, they're not necessarily unique to us, but we were really proud that we were able to partner with Hawaiian Community Lending again in their Lahaina Homeowner Recovery Program, which is really intended to work directly with homeowners who were impacted, help them get the highest insurance proceeds, for example, and really be able to get them on their way so that they can, pay off their existing mortgages and be positioned to be able to build. Because again, as we've been talking about, we don't want those families to move away. We don't want them, and if you're a family of young kids, you can't wait that long. You need to really be able to solidify your situation. And so, we're just proud to be one of many organizations that was supporting the work of Hawaiian Community Lending and Hawaiian, the Lahaina Homeowner Recovery Program, so that we can give those families hope and give them a reason to stay and want to rebuild, right? It just helps them kind of see the path forward. So that's just one example.
Yeah, I mean, Billy, what strikes me about the work that Michelle is doing and the work that you're doing is that it is banking, but it's banking in a kind of a different way, right? So talk a little bit about that, because when we think about someone who is a banker on Bishop Street, and we know you're not right on Bishop Street, but you're in the neighborhood, you don't tend to think of this kind of altruism, if you will. So how do you make both of those sides work?
I'd argue that banking in Hawaii is just different. I feel like a lot of the bankers that you meet, regardless of uniform, right? I feel like they all have that sense of place and this sense of commitment to community. And we're lucky to work for ASB, where it's part of our DNA. It's, we're coming up on 100 years. We were created as a thrift and loan. We were, doing savings accounts and mortgages, and so it's just part of our, the fabric of our DNA. It's what we were made to do. And I feel like it's a natural progression as we look at creative solutions to address some of the tough problems that we're facing, is to think, is not just to try and come up with it on your own, but thinking outside of the normal lanes of banking, right? And yes, we're a regulated entity, but there are things that we can do within the guardrails that still make a big impact on community, whether it's combining, coming up with this HUI was a good example of combining our community advancement department, our commercial real estate department, our home loans department, putting them all together in this HUI to now say, talk about how we fix this problem or how we address it. Again, no silver bullet, but these are where all these solutions started coming to fruition. And then it's about testing it, right? Getting something in motion. And we're happy to see the results so far. Again, we don't know, this is a long game. We're talking, Sterling mentioned generations. That is the play. This is not a short-term next quarter earnings report. This is a long game we're playing, and we're happy to be a part of it.
And when you're talking about that long game and knowing that this is going to take some time and that it's not going to happen overnight, Michelle, I'm wondering for you, how is the bank measuring success in this? Is it trying to get a certain amount of allocated people in homes, or is it, just other metrics that you're using to really measure where you folks are and finding that this is a successful program?
Right. Well, of course, you don't know the success of a program unless you have some good measurements in place, right? And so, Billy's been talking about our affordable housing HUI, and we do have a series of metrics. In fact, we just met this morning, and we talked through all of our metrics of how many folks in This Is Home, and how many folks have gone through our consumer education programs, how many volunteer hours have we been devoting in the community to help with that consumer readiness piece and that pipeline. So we do have all of those metrics that we're taking a look at, and we continue to develop them. But we really feel like, the real measure of success is going to be when people feel like they can stay here and they can be successful, and when they start returning, right? So Billy had shared a little bit earlier about his, family. Similarly, everyone in our affordable housing HUI, we all have either young adult or soon to be young adult children who were born and raised here, who are really questioning whether or not they can stay here and be successful and thrive. And we really want to make sure that we're providing that path. So I think ultimately to us, that's going to be the measure of success, right? Is when Billy has the best analogy. It's when the native birds come back home, right?
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah, Billy, share that with us.
Yeah, no. So, Hui Kapili, our kickoff event, we took them out to Pai Pai Ohe'ea fish pond. And we it was cool. They put their skills to work, building planter boxes and whatnot. But anyway, we spent a few hours out there. The executive director, Kili Kotubete, or I'm sorry, Hi'ilei's co-lead, Kili Kotubete, shared an example of when they were first starting out at the fish pond. It was a mess. Mangrove everywhere, not much. It was hard to tell whether or not they were making progress, right? Because they're trying to build this wall rock by rock, right? But he said one of the first signs of success was that the native birds started returning. And so what we take for that is, so we took from that is Hui Kapili, this builders accelerator, but also our housing initiatives. We will start to see some signs of success when local people actually say, "Hey, let's move back home." And so that it was a good metaphor. When he shared that with me, I said, I'm going to use that because it's the same thing for Hawaii and our local people.
And we want to turn that trend around.
That's right.
All right. Thank you both for being here today. We've really enjoyed the conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, very interesting conversation today on affordable housing. We started off speaking with Sterling Higa, who is just an impressive individual, just very well versed in what's happening with the affordable housing situation. We've heard from him about some of the advancements that is happening in the industry and some of the key successes of the last legislative session, hoping that things will rebound going into this next legislative session.
Yeah, interesting to hear his thoughts about doing these, basically what he called voluntary deed restrictions, where you would tie some money, then, investment from the state to then get to build on your land, knowing that you'd have to keep that affordable. That's one idea he said that's being floated. And then also transit-oriented development, really changing some of the zoning, expediting permitting systems. I mean, he had a lot to share. And then very interesting to hear from our last two guests, Billy Piper from ASB and Michelle Bartel, about some moves that the bank is making, knowing that these are programs that are generous toward local families, but they still are good business at the end of the day.
Yeah, and really following that VA model and saying that this is something that they looked at for some time and already seeing successes. And a lot of it is preparing those individuals who maybe might not think that they can afford affordable housing, but educating them about the process, making sure that they have everything well prepared so that when they are ready to hit that go button, and you heard him, they're really trying to encourage people, if you have everything lined up, and you find that property, not to wait because of the scarcity of inventory with housing in Hawaii, but really their goal is to really help in this affordable housing crisis and do more than just be a bank that is a lender.
Yeah, and wonderful to hear 1 in 4 loans that they are writing right now are to first-time home buyers, and hopefully those are local families who will stay here in Hawaii and really help to perpetuate the culture of this place. So very interesting conversation about affordable housing. We appreciate it. We're going to be focusing on the state of the economy next week with DBED Director Jimmy Tokioka.
Yeah, we're going to be talking and following up about some of the upcoming plans for the legislative session, as well as get an update about what's happening in Aloha Stadium, and also hear from industry leader in tourism, Jeff Wagner will also be joining us in that conversation. We hope you'll tune in right back here next week, Tuesday, for another episode of Spotlight Now.
Aloha.